Welcome to the Threshold Podcast, where we sit down with prayer leaders from all over to share their unique perspectives on prayer. Our hope is to learn from their experiences and insights to deepen our prayer life and to create cultures of prayer that transform lives and communities. Whether you've been a prayer leader for decades or you're learning to pray for the very first time, this is the place for you. Thanks for joining us. Let's jump in.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Threshold. We're so glad that you joined us today. And today we have another prayer leader that we're really excited for you to get a chance to get to know. His name is Chris Ngai. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Chris and I have been friends for some time, and he's just done some amazing things. And so you're going to be really excited to hear about what God's been doing through Chris through these years. And so let's dive right in, man.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, I first heard about you and your work with ASU, and I know you were involved in a thing called Love ASU.
Yeah.
Tell our audience about Love ASU, and particularly my audience and every audience loves stories. So we want to just hear some of the stories of Love ASU and what happened there. So take off, man.
Yeah, definitely. Really crazy story, but it actually began when I was in high school, and I would visit these prayer meetings, that were mostly like praying grandmas, and every now and then like a few praying grandpas, and I was like the one young person I knew that just like God transformed my life with prayer. I love prayer. And so that's where I wanted to be, was the prayer meetings, and so I would go to these different churches that would be holding, prayer meetings, and an unusual thing began to happen. So I would be in these prayer times, and I would have like this random prayer warrior grandma would walk up to me. And, so this happened one time. I was at another church, and she said, "Hey, have you ever considered going to Arizona State University?" And, it's the furthest thing from my mind. Just as a high school student, I wasn't even thinking about college. And I said, "I don't know, why are you asking?" And she said, "Well, God showed me that revival is coming to ASU, and I really think you should go and be a part of it."
Wow.
And so I'm like, okay, I'll consider it. I go to another prayer meeting, totally different church. The exact same thing happens. Praying grandma walks up to me. God showed me revival's coming to ASU. And then finally, about the fourth or fifth time, I realized God was trying to get my attention. And so I said, "Okay, God, I guess I don't have a choice in this. I'm going to ASU." And so I went to ASU, and honestly, my experience, it was honestly one of the most overwhelming experiences spiritually that I'd ever gone through. From the moment that I would set foot on campus to the moment I would leave, for the first 3.5 years, my experience was that I would just be bombarded with temptation, with just thoughts that were just like, just not good, and then, just this feeling that I feel like I'm the only Christian on the campus all the time. There's such an isolation. Such a heaviness and darkness just spiritually over the campus. It was at the time, it was the number one party school in the nation. It was actually known as a pastors and missionaries graveyard in the whole denomination. And things were just bad at ASU campus. And so for 3.5 years, that was just my experience, just feeling constantly overwhelmed, constantly alone. Even though I had Christian friends, I would go to Christian ministry nights, but it still felt like everything was disjointed, and it felt like you were just trying to survive all the time, and just you're just bombarded by temptation. And so about 3.5 years into it, I remember, I would just go to this little chapel in the middle of campus, and it almost seemed like nobody knew this chapel existed, even though it was right there in the social center of campus. And I'd be like the only one in there most of the time. And so I would go in there, I'd pray, I'd cry out for revival, I'd ask God to move, but then I'd follow up that prayer with like kind of an honest, like, "But Lord, how could you possibly ever move at a place like ASU? It's just so dark, so disunified, and I just don't possibly see how you could ever do anything on this campus." And so, long story short, the Lord began to set some things in motion my junior year in college, and I ended up at this United student kind of ambassador gathering in Ohio with a few other like-minded students, and they began to share a vision for unity, 24-hour prayer and revival. And basically everything they shared exactly like spoke to my heart, exactly resonated with what I was longing to see God do.
Yeah.
And Lord had just been speaking to me about this idea of what would happen if people began to pray like day and night, and what if God's presence began to rest on ASU campus, and students began to encounter him. And so, we went out from this gathering in Ohio. We got prayed for. They kind of commissioned us, and the Lord really began to confirm it in some really dramatic ways. But basically, my junior slash almost senior year of college, I began reaching out to other ministries and other students and just asking, hey, like, would you want to unite together? Would you want to pray together? And just kind of cast vision for what could happen if revival came to, the largest campus in the nation, Arizona State University. And so, about 5 to 7 of us started praying together weekly. We started sharing testimonies. The Lord led us to do one day of prayer, and so we did a day of prayer. And this is kind of a cool story, kind of that sort of, I think, began to open up the door for a lot of this. So that day, we started in the evening, and we felt like the Lord began to speak this theme of rain in the desert and streams in the dry land. And so we just prayed that like all through the night. The next day we're outside on the Hayden lawn, the main center of campus, and we have a little 10 by 10 tent, and we pulled out a guitar and we just started singing this song, Let It Rain, like open the floodgates of heaven. And so kind of was our prayer, our song. Well, what surprised us was that in the middle of singing this song, we began to experience the biggest torrential downpour of rain I think I've ever seen in Arizona, honestly. Like it was just, and it started in the afternoon. It didn't stop for like the rest of the day. And like it destroyed our trifold science board sign that we made last minute. The wind almost blew our tent away, and it was just this dramatic response from heaven. But we just really felt like the Lord was saying, like you're on the right track, like keep going. And so the next semester, we ended up feeling led to do 3 days and then 7 days of prayer. But something significant also happened during that semester. During that semester, we actually had a student who got a divine appointment with the president of the university. And through this divine appointment, he ended up opening the doors and said, hey, like he heard about all the students that were interested in prayer. And he said, tell you what, like, you shoot me a letter and I'll see what I can do in getting you a place to have, 24-hour prayer. And so all these doors opened up. We ended up, meeting with some high-level leaders on the campus. And through this, the Lord gave us an official spot. Unfortunately, we were expecting a building, and instead they just put us outside, out on the middle of campus. And so at first, we really didn't like the idea of being out in the middle of campus. We were very self-conscious. I mean, literally like thousands of students will walk by this spot every day. And at that time, everyone just stared at us like we were crazy. Like honestly, like so the feeling of when people like are staring at you, you can kind of feel their eyes burning into you.
Yeah.
But just imagine like hundreds of or thousands of eyes burning into you while you're trying to pray on the middle of campus. And
Oh my
you're
goodness.
just like, what am I doing out here? Like I can't even pray, And but we ended up doing 3 days and 7 days of prayer, and it went well. And the Lord really showed up in some amazing ways. And about this time, the prayer movement had grown to about 200 people now. So in the second semester, I mean, we went from like seven of us praying to now there's like 200 students coming out and praying. And now the third semester comes around and we feel like the Lord speaks to us and says, I want you to do a whole month of 24-hour prayer. And at that point, we're kind of wondering how we're going to make it a month. We barely lasted a week, and so we launched 40 days of prayer. But something begins to happen. The first week of launching into this prayer, we have a man in his 40s, probably. With college campuses, you have mostly young people, young adults, but you also have people all ages that are just, choose to pick up their studies. And so we had a man who was about age 40 walk into the prayer tent, Native American. And the first thing that he says when he walks in is he says, hey, is there a counselor that I can talk to, or anybody that you guys know? Because I'm planning on committing suicide today. And at that point, it's just me and my sister. We're both students. We look at each other and we said, hey, we'll listen. Well, we'd love to talk with you. And so he opens up about how he had just gotten back into drinking and just how It had caused a lot of tension with his family, and his wife had kicked him out of the house, and his kids, he wasn't able to see his kids, and all that just to say, he ends up, basically sharing that he doesn't feel like there's anything worth living for at this point. And so he asked us, what should I do? And so, and he actually offers up, should I start reading the Bible? What should I do? And we kind of look at each other. We're like, well, that would be awesome. That would be great. But if you want, but you can actually have a relationship with God right now. Like you can ask Jesus into your life, and you have a relationship with him, and like that emptiness that you're feeling inside, like only God can fill that. And at that point, he gets really uncomfortable, and he's like, "Hey, I appreciate your time. I think I'm gonna go now to class." And we're just so bummed out because it seems like such a divine moment. And so we said, "Okay, wait, before you go, can we just pray for you before you go?" So he's like, "Okay, yeah, sure." And so we put a hand on his shoulder, we start praying for him. And as we're praying for him, like the presence of God just pours out in such just descends upon this little tent in such a strong way, such a tangible way that me and my sister are just like, what is going on right now? Like we can totally sense God doing something. And so we were praying for him, and we asked God to move. And afterwards we asked him, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And he just kind of looks at us like, I don't know what just happened, but like while you guys were praying for me, I felt like all the sadness just like lift off of me, all the grief, all the heaviness, like all of it just lifted off. And I feel like really good right now. I feel like I'm kind of like, almost like I'm floating. Like I feel like really light. And we're like, wow, awesome. Praise God, And so we continue talking. And then at the end of it, he finishes up and he says, thank you guys so much. Woo! And then he just walks off. And we're like, and so we're just like stunned, like, did God just save a man from suicide? Like, what just happened, and then later that night, something similar happened. We didn't find out till 40 days later, but God rescued another girl from suicide, and just revealed himself to her, and just through like a simple prayer, just that students were praying for her. But in the midst of it, as we would just kind of pray and let the Holy Spirit lead our prayers, like the Lord ended up speaking exactly like the things that she needed to hear. Where for the first time she knew that God was real, and so he ended up rescuing her. Week 2, in this 40 days, we have our weekly student leader gathering, and so at this point there's I'd say about 17 to 20 of us, and we're outside, we're worshiping, we're praying, and and we've been growing in vision for about a year. But then something unusual happens during this prayer meeting, this worship meeting, and that it's like the Holy Spirit just began to take over like the worship and prayer time. And that's the only way I know how to describe it, because so we're worshiping, and all of a sudden people start praying with a passion I've never seen them pray with before. I mean, people start weeping, people, one girl like falls on her knees and she starts trembling under the presence of the Lord. And she actually interrupts me in the middle of worship, and she's whispering, trying to get my attention. And she basically tells me, she says, "Hey, Chris, like, I don't know what's happening right now, but I'm scared." And I'm like, "Why? What's going on?" And she's like, "I don't know, but I'm like trembling, I'm shaking. I can hardly breathe. I'm crying, and I have no idea why." And I said to her, "I think this is Jesus. Just keep your eyes on him." And she's like, "Okay." and so that happens to her. It happens to another girl. Same thing. I mean, God just starts taking over the prayer meeting, where it's like we just had this sense like it's no longer just us praying anymore, but like God is here. And then at some point, without anybody orchestrating it, anybody like saying, "Let's do this," we all just started shouting at the top of our lungs for about 15 or 20 minutes outside in the middle of campus. Like we start shouting at the top of our lungs, like, "Jesus is Lord, Jesus is victorious," just declaring the victory and like the lordship and the kingship of Jesus over ASU, this really dark campus, this #1 party school. And we just kept going. Like this holy boldness took over us. And about 20 minutes into this, it was like the heavens just opened up over ASU all of a sudden. And we were praying for revival. We heard stories of revival, but we really didn't know what to expect. Like, how are we going to know like when God actually comes? And all of a sudden, like the heavens start opening and something shifts, and like God just like comes to the campus. And like and the only way I know how to describe it is that from that point on, like for that semester, the rest of the semester, like we began to see like divine appointments happen like every single day for the rest of the semester. Like we began to hear crazy stories, like just revival type stories, and not just at the prayer tent, but like happening within every ministry that was part of the prayer tent. Like I mean, like for the next 6 years, like it was like the heavens just open and like miraculous stories just began happening that were just like way beyond like anything that anyone could ever like make happen in your own gifting or your own strength.
Right, right.
I mean, even to this day, like even to this day, we still hear stories of like of people say like, man, whatever happened during that time, like that was just so like so God, like and I'll hear stories that I just never knew about even back then, of things that the Lord did, and so just absolutely incredible. And there's so many stories I could share. I'll definitely share a few, but it was just this incredible moment where the heavens opened up. I mean, like from that point on, like we began to hear stories of agnostics all of a sudden started getting interested in the prayer tent. They started coming by and writing prayers on the whiteboard, like just in case God is real. We had atheists start coming in, and they started like really being drawn to the prayer tent. We had Muslims coming into the prayer tent. We had people who were fallen away from the Lord, and all of a sudden, like they would just come in and want to give their hearts back to the Lord. Um, Without anybody saying anything.
Wow.
We had people on their way to the student union, on just planning to get food, and all of a sudden God redirects their footsteps, and they end up in the prayer tent, and they're just crying, and they're just like, I don't know why I'm here. What am I doing? What is this place? And people just, students get a chance to share the gospel with them, get a chance to pray for them. We had one story of an atheist who was given a Christian book, and so he's reading the book, and while he's reading this book, the way he described it is that the words suddenly became three-dimensional, and it so freaked him out that he ends up giving his life to Jesus. And so we're just like, wow, like this sounds like a crazy story. And so a friend of mine wanted to make sure it was true, so he tracked him down, interviewed him, and found out, yeah, it's absolutely true. This happened, and it turns out that he was the president of the atheist club on the campus.
Oh, wow.
And so as you can imagine, he had to step down from power. He no longer and he ended up at the Christian tables every single day, just hanging out with people, talking with people. And so the next guy gets into power, and then a year later or two, he ends up in the 24-hour prayer space, and he's like in tears, and he's crying, the president of the atheist club, asking people how, I want to learn, how do you forgive? Like, I just don't understand how you do this, and he invites Christians to the atheist club to come and hang out with, and so last I heard, he hadn't given his life to Christ at the last point that I heard, but he was actively going to church and actively seeking out, is Jesus the way?
Wow.
And so, I mean, just incredible stories. I mean, so many stories that in the first year or two alone, I think there were at least 100 pages of testimonies of, just from so many different students, leaders, but absolutely incredible stories of people being rescued from suicide, people, hearing the voice of God while like high on drugs, having a party in the middle of their campus, and all of a sudden they start hearing like the audible voice of God speaking to them, and they end up giving their life to Jesus and like repenting like that night. And so just incredible stories of, stories that just you would only imagine hearing maybe in like a third world country, or like, of course it happens over there, but like on a university campus in America.
Yeah.
But like those kinds of stories just began to happen.
So you did 40 days, and then what happened? Where did it go from there?
Yeah, so we finished the 40 days. That was that first semester, and then we got to the end of the 40, and none of the students wanted to stop, and so we actually continued all the way until about Thanksgiving break, when we had to take a break. And so we it ended up going about 53 days, and then after that was finals. So it basically went to the end of the semester, and then kind of after that point, every semester for the next 13 or 14 years after that, we had a season of at least 21 days, but usually 30 or 40 days of 24-hour prayer every semester after that. And so it launched us into a season of another 13, 14 years of just every semester, day and night worship and prayer, incredible encounters, incredible stories. um, yeah, I mean, things just kind of took off from there, and the Lord really, and what was interesting was at that point, it actually went from 200 people the second semester and exploded to about, I want to say about 400 people conservatively that we could track that came out. And um, I mean, yeah, just amazing things started happening from that point on. The ASU's party rankings actually plummeted from that. You can actually see a graph. It started plummeting, as the prayer went up, the party rankings went down.
Yeah.
Articles began to come out in the research papers about how prayer really works and how prayer brings healing, and and ASU's research papers. We had that denomination that had said that this is a graveyard. Don't try to plant a church here. They ended up being able to plant a church for the first time, and it's like it's lasted.
Yeah.
I mean, just incredible stories just began happening. But it actually began to inspire faith and other campuses around Arizona as well. And so, at the end of that second semester or that third semester, when things broke out, um, before the next one started, or around the beginning of the next one, we had a statewide conference, and then out of those testimonies that were shared, almost like immediately, like we shared some of the stories, and almost immediately U of A, kind of in this like godly, like the godly form of competition, like not that it was a really competition, but I mean they kind of got up and they were provoked and they said, you know what, ASU did 40 days of prayer. We're going to do 40 days of 24-hour prayer this semester. And then NAU gets up. We're going to do 21 days of 24-hour prayer. Then GCU ended up doing 7 days. And then Southwestern did 3 days, and just so on and so forth. So the Lord just really began to inspire something in the students,
As you talk about this, it kind of reminds me of the book of Acts. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't imagine standing in the middle of the campus well, there must have been people hooting at you and calling you names and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And yet you stood in there and kept going. What a testimony.
Yeah, I mean, we had some interesting situations. We had some guys who came over one time and we were pretty sure they were going to pick a fight with us, and we were like, Lord help us, but then he like diffused the situation, and we ended up getting a chance to pray for them and like just like bless them and encourage them. I mean, we had so many crazy situations and amazing God stories happen. I mean, there were people that we had freshmen who got inspired in the midst of everything God was doing, and they began to go out and look for people with injuries on the campus, and they just had faith that God was going to heal them if they prayed for them. And so we had one story of a guy who actually came to the prayer tent on crutches, old, probably like maybe his 50s or 60s. These two freshman students prayed for him, and instantly, like, God healed his broken foot, and he drops, like, actually had a cane, so he drops his cane. He begins jumping up and down on his foot, totally healed, and the guy gives his life to Jesus.
Wow.
And then tells them, he tells the students that he was going to go home and break out the Bible, which had been collecting dust on his shelf, and we had other people, who were healed didn't need their crutches anymore. We had a Muslim student come in one time and just joined us for 2 hours of worship. And at the end of it, someone shares the gospel with him, and he ends up giving his life to Christ. But then what was amazing was that they didn't stop there. He ends up coming out every single night for the rest of those 40 days. He ends up getting discipled in this 24-hour prayer space of just hearing the Bible read out loud, hearing people like pray to Jesus. And by the end of these 40 days, he's saying things like, if we don't pray, how is the Holy Spirit going to fall? Like saying things that a lot of believers didn't have a revelation on at that time. We had a girl who was on the verge of committing suicide, just had grown up just so broken, like never heard the name of Jesus, never been to church, and just all that she grew up in prostitution, grew up in drugs. All that she knew was that just had no self-worth at all, and the way she described it is that she just felt like a piece of garbage, or a piece of like the worst like scum on the earth that just would like deserve to be discarded and thrown away. And she ends up wandering on the campus one night, just like wanting to like not wanting to live anymore, not wanting to breathe anymore. And all of a sudden she sees this little sign that says 24-hour prayer, all are welcome. And so she doesn't believe in God, she's atheist, but she walks in and she's sitting there and she's wondering like, what am I doing here? Like, I don't even believe in God. I'm like praying to a God that's not real, that like is just imaginary, and like, but yet like I don't know what to do, And so she's sitting there, and all of a sudden this girl walks up to her and starts to like just speak these words from heaven to her about like, God, sees you, and like your name is written on his hand, and starts like speaking things that she was just kind of like pondering in her heart. And she's like, what? Like, and it just in that moment, all of a sudden God becomes real to her, and she said that like that all of a sudden it was like everything changed, like all of a sudden like every little thing became like she saw beauty in it. All of a sudden she saw that like every bird, that was like every sparrow, every bird was like this gift from heaven to her. Like it's like all of a sudden the world had like life and color, and so she begins coming, she begins coming out to the Monday night worship and prayer, and just and again kind of being discipled by like the songs. And crazy enough, our worship leader kind of got a sense something was going on with this girl who would just kind of sit at the back, and so he began feeling led to sing songs that explain the gospel through song, and within a few weeks she's giving her life to Christ, and what was crazy was she goes from being one of the most depressed, suicidal students on the campus to being one of the most joyful students on the campus. Where, I mean, she would get so much joy that would just well up within her. It looked like it was about to explode out of her, and like she would just like burst with like joy. She'd start dancing and like just laughing and like filled with and just a huge smile. But she would get so self-conscious about that she would she would get embarrassed and just like walk away and like disappear for like 10 minutes and then come back. And then the same thing would happen. And she'd explode with joy, disappear for like 10 minutes and come back.
Wow.
And so it's just incredible, like that in that atmosphere of the presence of God and in revival, it's like the most depressed, students on the campus, the most, or whatever community that you might be in, the most depressed people, and that, just one encounter with the Lord, they can become the most joyful person you've ever met. The most lonely, the most broken, isolated can become, just those Saul to Paul encounters. I mean, even my own wife, like when I met her, she was in the deepest depression of her life, in like the deepest like 2 or 3 week depression of her life. God encounters her in a student leader meeting that she wasn't even supposed to be at, and all of a sudden she realized God was real, and God knew her and like loved her, and so the Heidi that I met, like when she shared her testimony with me, it didn't make any sense, because like the only Heidi that I've ever known is like the Heidi that is like full of joy, full of life, like loves Jesus, like is just full of worship, full of, but that was the story of so many of our friends during those days, is that the only person that we ever knew was the one that God encountered and transformed, because in meeting all these people, as our first meeting was almost synonymous with like that was the time when God encountered them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember my brother was super shy, would never talk to anybody, but in the midst of this revival, he became so bold. He began like chasing people down on the campus, asking them if he could pray for them. Like they're just like so much boldness.
Yeah.
Like he'd pray for them, they get healed, and then he'd disappear. He wouldn't even tell them like their name, his name. And but it's just like this holy boldness just began to take over us. Where instead of like being like these I don't know, like secret agent Christians for Jesus on the campus, we became so open about Jesus. We just would worship him openly, we would talk about him openly. And there were even moments during this move of God on the campus where I remember one day where like it seemed like everywhere I walked, I heard conversations about Jesus everywhere. The student union, on the way to class, I'm like, man, it's just everyone's talking about Jesus on this campus right now, and so just absolutely incredible. I mean, just story after story of just God showing up in the most unlikely situations, touching the most unlikely of people, atheists. I mean, there's another guy, hardcore atheist, interested in this Christian girl, but like, absolutely not interested in God. She invites him to the prayer tent, and he's thinking she's going to be there. And when she's not, he's like, oh no, what did I get myself into? And so he's like stuck at the prayer tent for like, just trying to like make it through, and just thinking these guys are crazy. But then as he kind of hears people praying, the Lord starts just like touching his heart in a deep way. And he's like, man, these guys are praying for people that they don't know, that they're never going to meet. But they're praying with so much sincerity and so much love. Like like, wow. And they're praying for things that I care about. Like, oh my goodness. And he said that with each person praying, he described it as almost like I forget how he said it, but almost like a spontaneous, like jazz, like,
Yeah. Wow.
musicians where just everything just kind of is spontaneous, but it all fits together somehow.
Yeah.
And he didn't know any other way to describe it, but but everyone's prayer they would add something, and it would just be like this spontaneous, perfect like orchestra of like a prayer, And
Amazing.
in the midst of that, like he ends up coming to Jesus, and he ends up like giving his life to Christ. And so, anyways, just so many amazing stories.
Wow.
Of,
So, Chris, you did that for how many years?
so we did that for about 15 years or so, 2005 to 2020.
Okay. And now I know you've shifted. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So in 2020, the Lord actually surprised us, and of course, a lot changed in that year, as we all know. The world changed, but we've been through many seasons, and so we were planning on just persevering through that and continuing on. But the Lord actually surprised us, and in the middle of 2020, we felt like the Lord actually asked us to surrender the ministry, almost like Isaac on the altar.
Yeah.
The thing that we had really believed for and dreamed of and held on to for so long. I mean, we were honestly ready to be there until Jesus returned, or until the fullness of revival came to ASU. But we felt like the Lord said, I want you to take a step back now and surrender it to me. And I want to birth something new out of that. So we surrendered it in faith. And it was probably one of the hardest things we've ever had to do in ministry. Because we had no plan for what's beyond this, And so we surrendered it to the Lord, began seeking the Lord. And out of that, we felt like the Lord kind of birthed something new out of that. And so formerly the movement was known as Love ASU at ASU campus. And that was really just a collaboration of, anywhere from 7 to 14 ministries that would come together every semester and unite in worship and prayer and crying out for revival and just seeing God move. And we felt like the Lord gave a new kind of identity of Love United, and basically just the idea of just a revival family coming together from across many different ministries, streams, churches, with the goal, with the purpose of preparing the way for transforming revival, in campuses, churches, and communities, and really an awakening in this generation, young and old.
So really what you did was you took Love ASU and just broadened it to reach out to other campuses, other churches, and so on.
Yeah, like in one sense, yes, but in another sense, it is very different in kind of its heart DNA and kind of its values, and that would take some time to kind of unpack. But it is similar, but it's different. But
Yeah.
it is kind of in a sense like a 2.0, like the next
Yeah.
the next story, or the next place in the journey, I
Yeah,
guess.
very cool. Well, Chris, I loved hearing your story today and
Oh,
all
thank you.
those stories. That's awesome. Thanks for what you did at ASU. My goodness, what a warrior.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I know our audience is going to be thrilled as they hear your talk. And I know we're going to get to do another one of these, so I'm looking forward to that. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate getting a chance to be on here with you. And one other thing I'll just say is that I'm just really thankful, because I know that this movement that happened at ASU, that it really was a move of God, and it really was many students, thousands of students, thousands of fathers and mothers and pastors who believed in it and said yes and sowed into it. And so I know that and I just want to just honor. I know there's too many to name, but I just want to honor just those countless just young men, young women, older men and older women who poured out their hearts for ASU just late into the night, early in the morning, all through the day. The Lord just really showed up in a beautiful way. And I really believe that Lord wants to do it again in a greater way for campuses, churches, and communities.
Yeah. That's cool. I know you wrote a book too. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. So in 2017, the Lord actually led us to write a book and just kind of share some of these stories and testimonies. It's called A Vision of Revival. And it came out in 2017, but right now it's you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on visionofrevival.com. But basically it covers three things. One, it's the testimony of what God can do on a college campus. And I think so many people need that, because especially in the day that we're living in right now, like college campuses have become the place where most young people lose their faith.
Yeah.
They say 75% of young people who grow up in the church end up falling away from their faith and leaving the church within their freshman year, and many don't return. But the other thing is that with that, when you look at the national average of most college campuses in the nation, less than 5% are Christian. And so, and the result is that, you see so many get taken out during their college years, and you see it in the church. And like, you see that 18 to 25 age group, and maybe it's bigger now, but that age group is almost completely missing from most churches. And so we wanted to give hope that God can move in this young generation, and on college campuses where so many have given hope, and given up hope. And so one, it's a testimony of what God can do on campuses. And if God could do it at ASU, he could do it anywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
Secondly, it's kind of a compilation of biblical, historical, and experiential principles of revival, of how can we prepare communities to begin to see the heavens open for God to move, and they really span across. They're not just limited to college campuses, because they really are biblical principles. They really are seen throughout history, and they were the things that we also saw open up the heavens in a really significant way. And then lastly, just kind of a guide for pioneers. Like in there we include a lot of things like. We don't just include the victories, we also include the struggles, and the things that we didn't do well, and the things, the mistakes that we made, because we really wanted, we really sensed God put it in our hearts that he wanted to help empower the next generation of pioneers, and also revival core families, core groups, revival families, to be able to learn from those mistakes and then bypass them to overcome those common pitfalls to revival and seeing a new move of God begin.
Very good. Tell us the name of the book one more time, and we'll have to.
Yeah, so Vision of Revival. And this specific one is for college campuses, but we're actually about to come out with a new one for campuses, churches, and regions. And so we're kind of broadening it. It's basically going to be the same book, but we're broadening it for just many different communities.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Chris. This is great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
God bless. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope this episode has inspired and equipped you to take your prayer life to the next level. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and check out our website at thresholdprayer.com for more resources and information. Threshold Prayer Ministries is a nonprofit ministry that aspires to assist churches, organizations, and businesses to become people devoted to prayer. We do this by offering strategic methods, resources, and encouragement developed by prayer leaders for prayer leaders. All that we do is made possible by our generous supporters like you. So thank you for your support in donations and in prayer. Together, we can transform lives and communities through the power of prayer. In Jesus' name.